This one mistake cost me over $1 million in retirement. Hi, my name's Chloe. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about something that I think is really important, and that's the top 5 things that I wish I could tell myself as a 20-year-old about personal finance. I'll share with you some of the biggest mistakes that I personally made and what I just wish I had known in general. And I'll be honest, a lot of it ends up being millions of dollars in missed opportunity in retirement. And honestly, that's why I think it's so important to share. We've got to learn from our mistakes, right? So before we get started, be sure to hit like, be sure to hit subscribe, especially if you like learning about money, because that's what we do on this channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Chloe. I'm a personal finance coach and a financial content creator. On this channel, we talk about money. So whether it's me sharing my spending reports for the month or me talking about how to start investing, essentially I'm just sharing everything that I have learned over the years about money. If that's the kind of thing that you're into, be sure to hit like, be sure to hit subscribe so that you can see when I come out with new videos every week. Like I said, this week we're going to cover the top 5 things that I wish I had known when I started off my personal finance journey in my early 20s. And let's be honest, I didn't really start off my personal finance journey until my late 20s, which is going to be one of the mistakes. So let's get right to it. So the very first thing that I would have told myself as a 20-something is that I should have gone to community college as long as possible. Now, you're probably thinking like, well, Chloe, shouldn't have you told yourself that at 18 years old? And yeah, that would have been even better. But I actually went to community college from the time that I was 18 till 20. And if I had gone back, if I could go back and talk to 20-year-old me, instead of rushing to go to a 4-year university, especially an out-of-state 4-year university, I would have encouraged myself to stay at the community college to get as many credits as humanly possible before transferring to another school. The reason is because when I went to community college, that was paid for. I didn't have to take out any loans or go into debt because it was affordable enough that my parents were actually able to help me pay for it.
Hi, it's editing Chloe. So clearly my remote wasn't working and I cut out half of what I had filmed. So what I was going to say here is I ended up going to a 4-year university that was out of state after I went to community college for a couple of years. And that put me in $80,000 of debt for a degree in English and a degree in Spanish.
Not exactly high-paying degrees to be going that deep into debt for. The reason I see this as such a big mistake is because not only did that $80,000 keep me in debt for many years, but if I had invested $80,000 instead, and I know no 18-year-old has $80,000 to invest right away, but if I had been able to invest $80,000 in 50 years, if it had returned about 10% on average every year, I would have had over $9 million. I would have been in a better spot financially than I am today. I also don't think that I got $80,000 worth of knowledge and experience and value out of my college experience. I think I could have very easily gotten just as good of an experience staying at community college as long as possible and then going to a much more affordable school in state. What I have learned over the years, and I've been in my career now for about 10 years, is that where you went to school really doesn't matter after your first job. And even with your first job, I don't really think it matters as much as it used to. What actually matters is your work ethic, what you're willing to learn, your work experience, your attitude, your soft skills, like your ability to communicate, your ability to learn new things, your ability to take on new tasks. What doesn't matter is the degree, especially when your degree is in something like liberal arts. Now, granted, if I had taken a specialized approach and I had gone into marketing or I had gone into business or I had gone into entrepreneurship, then maybe it would have been more worth it for me to go that $80,000 in debt to get a really good degree from a really good school. But in my circumstances, I just don't think it was worth it. I would have much rather had that $9 million, in theory. The second thing I would tell myself in my early 20s, and really at any time in my 20s, is to not buy that new car. When I was 24, I started working at a nonprofit making $42,000 a year. And a few months after I got that job at the nonprofit, I ended up buying a brand new Prius C I think it was like a 2015 Prius C. And while I absolutely loved that car cost me $20,000. $20,000 was about half of my salary at that time. And I even remember thinking, should I buy this $20,000 version or should I buy the car that's a year old and $7,000 less? And in my mind, I was like, it's really not going to make that big of a difference on my monthly payment, so I might as well just buy the $20,000 car instead. I really wish I hadn't done that. Only paying $13,000 over the course of a few years would have made such a huge difference in terms of when I would have been able to invest more earlier. For example, if I had only spent $10,000 on a used car and I had used that extra $10,000 to invest instead, I would have had almost $500,000 invested 40 years later just from investing that extra $10,000 instead. I ended up selling that car a few years after I bought it too, and while I did make $10,000 back and I was able to invest that money and really make back the money that I invested in the first place, it would have been so much nicer to have a much smaller car payment so that I could have paid off my debt faster or invested more in the market. Personally, I just don't think there's that much value to buying a new car and spending that much more money, especially because the second that you drive off the lot, the car starts to depreciate. So personally, if I could go back and do it again, I would have gotten the $13,000 car instead of the $20,000 car. The third thing I would have done, and this is a huge one, is I would have done everything I could to start maxing out a Roth IRA as early as possible. So for those of you who don't know, a Roth IRA is an amazing retirement account that allows you to put in post-tax dollars into your retirement account so that it grows tax-free for the rest of your life. That's pretty cool. No other account offers that kind of benefit, and had I been doing that when I was in a much lower tax bracket than I am now, I would have saved so much money on taxes by the time I retired. The ability for your money to grow tax-free, that means if your $1,000 in your Roth IRA turns into $10,000, you don't have to pay taxes on that $9,000 extra dollars that you made by investing in the stock market. That's essentially free money. That's money that you didn't have to work for. It's just money that your money worked to make you. It's money that your money made for you. But at 20 years old, I didn't understand anything about investing, so I really didn't start investing until I was 28. That is so much time that I wasted. In fact, if I had started maxing out my Roth IRA at the age of 20 and done that for 8 years, I would have had over $60,000 invested by the time I was 28. Whereas when I started at 28, I was starting with like $10,000 that I had had in my 401k from putting the maximum match in my 401k. Again, I don't know about you, but if I could have found a way to make that $500 investment every month from the age of 20 all the way to 28, I'd certainly love having that $60,000 extra to pad my retirement account. And again, that's $60,000 tax-free, so it's money that I've already paid taxes on. So if you're new here and you're watching this and you're in your early 20s, if you can start investing in your Roth IRA, I highly recommend doing that as soon as possible. Now, the fourth thing that I would have told myself is to stop living above your means. Yes, it is really cool to be able to go out there and try all the new restaurants and go to the brunch places and go out to the bars and date and do all of that stuff. But what's also cool is making sure that you're set up financially for the rest of your life. If I had spent those 10 years of my 20s really focusing on learning how to invest, learning how to spend my money, learning how to increase my income, and learning how to be able to stop working someday, I'd be in a much better financial situation than I am today. And that's not to say that I should have cut out all of that stuff. It's just that instead of going out 3 times in a weekend, I should have maybe gone out 1 time in a weekend or 1 time a week so that I could really budget and start saving an emergency fund, as also start using that money to invest in my Roth IRA. Obviously, that didn't happen, and by the time I was 28 and I decided, I wonder where my money is going every month, because I went from making $42,000 a year to $70,000 a year, and I was still living paycheck to paycheck, and so I couldn't really understand, I keep making more money, so how is it that I'm still living paycheck to paycheck? I finally decided to figure out where the heck my money was actually going, and when I did, all I did is I tracked where my money was going for 2 weeks just to see. Every time I'd spend money, I'd write it down in this tiny little notebook, say what it was for, and just do that for the 2 weeks. And what I realized is that every 2 weeks, I was blowing money on eating out, entertainment, being hungover, getting drunk, and all of that stuff. And $600 every 2 weeks, well, obviously I could easily have put that money into a Roth IRA, but I was also not saving money for an emergency fund. I wasn't even spending money on things that really brought me the most value. I was just busy saying yes to everything. Anytime my friends wanted to do something, my answer was going to be yes, and I was going to find the money to do it, even if that meant going into credit card debt. I wish I had learned how to say no, and I wish I had decided, okay, instead of doing this and letting my money go wherever my friends want my money to go, instead I would much rather decide where I want my money to go, put it there first, like that $500 a month in a Roth IRA, and then budget with the rest of the money instead. That way, at least I'd still be able to spend my money as I wanted, but making sure that I had my really big, important goals covered. Lifestyle creep is real, and we're never going to be able to reach financial independence where we don't have to work anymore if we just keep spending what we make. And if every year we're making more money and we're just spending more money, then we're really not going into a better place. Building wealth is not about how much money you make, it's about how much money you keep. And throughout my early 20s and into my late 20s, I wasn't keeping any money. And so I had to learn the hard way that in order for me to be able to retire someday, I have to stop living in this lifestyle creep hamster wheel. Which brings me to number 5. I wish I had known earlier to get an emergency fund. So an emergency fund for anybody, no matter what your age, no matter what your circumstances, is always important. The only difference is in my early 20s, I probably would have had a much smaller emergency fund than what I would have had now. But instead, I never focused on saving an emergency fund, and instead I used my credit cards like emergency funds. And because of that, every time that I spent money, I'd put it on my credit card, and then at the end of the month, I'd always use the rest of my money to pay off my credit card. So it was just this constant cycle where I was constantly spending what I earned or more and then using my income to pay off my credit card. So I never got ahead. Emergency funds, which if you want to learn how to create an emergency fund, check out this video here. But emergency funds are so important because they keep us out of high interest debt. And the thing is, I was so stressed out about money during my early 20s and mid 20s and late 20s because I just never felt like I was ever going to have enough. And I was always worried that I was always going to be stuck on that hamster wheel. And so in order for me to get off of that and to feel the peace of knowing like I'm going to be okay, I would have wished that I could have started an emergency fund for myself. I remember there were many times throughout my 20s where I was worried about how I was going to pay rent, or I was worried about how I was going to pay for something that was coming up, like a windshield breaking or an oil change or something along those lines. And if I had had an emergency fund for those unexpected expenses, then I would have had much more peace of mind and not felt stressed out all of the time about money. So that's pretty much it. Those are the top 5 things that I would have told myself about money back in my early 20s. And to be fair, there's probably like 20 things that I'd like to tell myself about money in my early 20s. But let me leave you with this bonus one. I wish I would have told myself to get into therapy earlier. Why is that? Because mental health and money are so deeply combined. For me, when my mental health wasn't good, I really felt the need to spend money in order to make myself feel better. So when my anxiety was bad, when my depression was bad, when I felt like I didn't have any control over the world, what I would do is often I'd spend money, whether it was spending money on a trip or spending money on a vacation or spending money on going out to eat and going out to dinner or going shopping. I'd always use it as a way to get my dopamine up and feel better for a moment. But then the lack of money, the lack of being able to save, the lack of being able to prepare for my future kept me in the cycle of feeling depressed and anxious all of the time. If I had instead focused on getting back into therapy, focused on really understanding why I felt depressed, focused on ways of figuring out how to feel less anxious all the time, focused on coping mechanisms and healing, I wouldn't have had to use these techniques to numb myself all of the time, because essentially that's what I was doing. When it comes to spending money and mental health, I was spending money to numb the feelings of anxiety that I had. And even though it worked really temporarily, it would actually end up making my anxiety and my depression worse because I felt trapped all of the time. And I don't know about you, but feeling trapped is not a good feeling to have, whether you're an anxious person or not. But feeling that trapped feeling of like, this is going to be my life for the rest of my life because I cannot figure out how to spend my money and I can't do better because I'm just bad with money, that just kept me in this constant cycle of never feeling like I was going to get out and feeling like things were pretty hopeless. Once I was able to get out of that cycle, because I focused on my mental health, because I focused on healing from the trauma that I had completely pushed down and was not addressing, I was then able, after dealing with my mental health, after dealing with all of that hard stuff, then I was able to really open up my brain so that I could focus on other things like learning how to manage my money. So if I could do it all over again, instead of waiting until I was like 26 or 27 to go to therapy again, I would have asked myself as soon as I came back to Chicago, back in 2015, I would have gotten myself a therapist. But I honestly thought for several years that I was totally fine, and what happened to me in China while I lived in China, which for those of you who don't know, I spent 2 years living in China, and during that time I did have a very traumatic experience happen to me. I thought I was fine though, and instead of focusing on getting myself a therapist and deciding, okay, I'm going to figure out how to feel better from the inside instead of using money to numb how I was feeling on the outside, I would have been able to get control of my money a whole lot sooner. So don't sleep on your mental health. Always take the time, if you're able to address it, to figure out what you really need to do in order to cope and what you need to do in order to heal. Getting your mental health right pays the best dividends. So that's all I have for you guys today, but tell me what you would have told your 20-year-old self down in the comments below. I'm always curious to know what advice people would give their younger selves. And like I said, this is only actually 6 things that I would have told myself, and really I probably would have told myself a whole lot more and just given her like a big hug and told her that everything was going to be okay. But essentially, this is in a nutshell what I would have told myself. So let me know what you would have told yourself down in the comments below. And if you've watched it this far, be sure to hit like, be sure to hit subscribe. And thank you so much for being here and watching. If you're not already following me on TikTok and Instagram, be sure to follow me there. I post on TikTok upwards of 5 times a day, and I post on Instagram at least twice a day into my story all of the time. And it's all money content. So go check me out there, and always let me know that you're coming from YouTube so that I can say hi and thank you for subscribing. So again, thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you guys next time.